really cool hackerspace slash makerspace. Ray is the Pumping Station 1 member that sponsors our event here, so thank you, Ray. Printers, all kinds of woodworking equipment, welders back there. I don't even know what's over on that side. So if you're curious, go talk to Ray. I'll give you a tour. I'll tell you all about it.
I'll collect you up all after the meeting, after this meetup, and get you done in time to go over to Cheap O'Neill's.
Yeah, very good. And there's lots of very cool and very dangerous equipment. So I think Ray's insurance issues requires that you fill out a waiver. So they are all on the back table over there. And Ray's got some. If you haven't done that yet, please do so. So this meetup is run by myself and Brooke and Mark, and it's an entirely volunteer-run meetup. So we are always happy to accept donations. We have a QR code on the back there for Bitcoin donations and a jar for 30 fiat. We do every workshop before our main presentation, we do lightning talks. So if any of you would like to come up here for about 2 or 3 minutes and tell us, whatever it is you'd like us to know, a project you're working on, if you'd like help with something in particular, if you're looking to, recruit programmers or business people or whatever the case may be, please come up and tell us what's going on. Do we have any takers today? None? Just tell us what you're working on. Maybe? That's a yes. Yeah. Come on up. Come on up.
Oh, no. We're premature.
Yeah, we'll be nice to you.
Can I just sit here and talk about it?
Sure. Let's
Why don't you stand up?
Yes.
Stand up for this. I've been working at a kind of data scraping the market. I've written a bunch of code that takes a lot of data points about code, like social movements, number of mentions on Twitter and Reddit, development movements on the different Git sites and stuff like that. Price volume, and trying to put together like a calculus for what like a cap of a coin would be, and when a coin is going to move. I have gotten to some reliable signals because I've been working with a data scientist, which is I do data science like as a career, but somebody way smarter than me. We got together and figured out some interesting models.
So market analysis stuff?
Yeah, and to figure out kind of where the market is. Yeah, not just for mooning. Like mooning is nice. Everybody wants to go to moon. But
Social engagement index.
Social engagement.
So yeah, you basically rank them by the social environment.
Yeah. Do some like regressions and clustering algorithms, that kind of stuff. There's been some interesting stuff. But also just to figure out like what technology is really going to be useful in the market.
Okay.
And doing whatever you will do.
Speculating is fine. It's okay.
All right. Thank you.
I got one too.
All right.
I don't know. Are you guys familiar with DEF CON? Anybody going to DEF CON this year? Particularly, you are. I'm going to be hosting a crypto coin party there, and I need some help coding up the invite app because I'm doing a little like token sale to get into the party kind of thing. And I have a GitLab project I'm setting up, so if anybody wants to contribute, just come find me, talk to me afterwards. I can get you set up. You can send me an email. I can send you an invite. So.
Doing SEO.
It is pretty much, but you don't have to pay for it. So.
Party ICO.
You can store invite on your Trezor.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Any other one? Excellent. Stand up, please.
Yes. I'm Bill Slater. I've been in Bitcoin for about 3.5 years, and I'm a cybersecurity guy, which really got me all cranked up about it. And so I presented on Bitcoin at the big cybersecurity conference that IIT holds every year back in 2014. And I'm offering this up, even though it's locked in 2014. If you go to billslater.com/Bitcoin, there's a nice presentation out there that you can share with your spouse or your significant other to help them understand what you're doing. I'm sure a lot of this will be trivial to a lot of you guys, but there's some really good stuff in the presentation. It's very popular. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's billslater.com/Bitcoin.
Excellent. All right, anyone else? Okay, cool. So I just want to let you guys know that after the presentation today, so Jake here's going to be talking for, 20, 30, 40 minutes or so, then there'll be a bit of a Q&A session. And afterwards, you can go get a tour with Ray, and the rest, well, all of us, a lot of us, are going to be headed over to Yocom-Piatt, which is a bar just like a half block down that way, right on the same street right here. So we'll head over there a little bit after this. If you want to take the tour, and then just come meet us. I think we have the upstairs room, but if you just tell the hostess you would pick their meetup, they will direct you. So our speaker for today is Jake from Decred. And he's going to talk to us about the Decred project and about cryptocurrency governance systems. So if you guys aren't familiar with Decred, I'll tell you a tiny bit. Jake will tell you a lot more. It's, in alternative cryptocurrency. And they do some interesting stuff. You guys do proof of work and proof of stake, right? And they have a lot of interesting things around, voting for protocol changes and that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. Jake has been involved with open source projects for, 10 years now? And funded and oversaw the creation of a btcsuite, which is a full node implementation written in Golang, right? And involved in a number of other projects, including a high security asynchronous chat system. So he is going to be telling us all about Decred and cryptocurrency governance systems. So please welcome Jake.
Okay, let's get this show on the road. Okay, so my name is Yocom-Piatt. This is a presentation about Decred. It's an introduction. It's meant to take somebody who understands Bitcoin with, some passing level of familiarity and bring them up to speed on Decred and teach them about what we're doing and how this sort of addresses the present governance problem in Bitcoin. We'll watch the logo animate for a hot second and rather than next thing. So I'm the Decred project lead, and I'm also the CEO of Company Zero LLC. I have a background in physics. I spent a lot of time running my own businesses, and now I do this. I work on cryptocurrency stuff all day, pretty much every day. It's a fun job, but it's not for everybody. There's a lot of, you have to be ready to stand there when things are low, and then, keep your head on straight when things are going well. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about Bitcoin. So we're going to start by talking about Bitcoin and Decred's relationship with Bitcoin. We've taken Bitcoin, bolted on proof of stake governance, and then there are sort of deeper seated incentive changes that we made on top of that. The combination of these things ends up solving serious problems that I see, that we saw back in 2014, and I feel like a lot more people have seen since then in Bitcoin. And there's a lot to just this sentence, but this really does capture the sort of, the broad arc of what we're doing with Decred. So making the changes to get Decred off the ground was relatively serious work, and there was a lot of moving of rocks that wasn't very exciting. So the motivation here really was that proof of work is not such a great way to run a currency. That is, at first, when everybody can CPU mine or GPU mine, there's some semblance of decentralization. But then as you start to get into ASICs, things start to get really centralized, and then there ends up being a monopoly on the decision making. And the way that happens is that, in these distributed ledgers that Bitcoin pioneered, the only people who can write to the ledger are the proof of work miners. As such, if you disagree with something that they're doing, you really don't have much of a say because they're the only people who enforce the consensus rules. So that group becomes super important and super powerful, whether they realized it or not earlier on. So what we did is that we made it so that proof of stake, people who participate in the proof of stake mining system can have an opt-in representation and also trump the power of the proof of work miners. And this is done to sort of restore order to the system. If you look at a normal company, let's say we're talking about like a venture capital backed company, the people who ultimately make the calls with this company, the larger ones, are typically the shareholders. If there's a big budget, if there's a big decision, the shareholders may make it. And with Bitcoin, the way it ended up working is that the bookkeepers are the ones making all the decisions. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of restore order to cryptocurrency by putting the people who hold the cryptocurrency back in the driver's seat. On top of that, anyone who's familiar with the development of Bitcoin knows that there's a real tragedy that common's going on, which is that without a major corporation like Blockstream or Company Zero or somebody showing up and saying, I'm going to pay to have this code written, there's a big problem. It just, somebody's supposed to write the code for free and make the network better. And so what we decided is that we would address that by taking 10% of every block, and that subsidy goes into a special, subsidy address that's just for the development organization. And that would apply to things like writing code, doing marketing, doing PR, presence at events, all of that sort of stuff. So we're going to take a look at how Bitcoin was designed because, as a lot of people in the room recognize, Bitcoin was really just a real surprise when it got released. It was a big leap beyond everything else out there. And so understanding how that leap happened is something that we hope that we can use to improve Bitcoin in a substantive way. So Bitcoin is one project, but it threw one rock and knocked a whole bunch of birds out of the sky. And what it ended up doing is it created, to me, a design principle that I think any cryptocurrency project should aim to emulate. That is, whatever technology or whatever features you add, you should really be trying to accomplish as much as possible with a relatively small set of changes. Whether it's a small set of changes in code or a small set of changes sort of conceptually, that's another matter entirely. But the upshot is that we want to accomplish as much as possible with as little as possible. So the main insight with Bitcoin was gamification of timestamping into a computation puzzle. In the sense that when we're talking about mining blocks, we go, hey, here's this hard math problem. The first person to solve it gets a reward. And by doing that, what you do is you remove the centralized authority that's typically associated with a ledger. Like, if you're talking about a digital bank, who's going to run the timestamping mechanism? Well, whoever's going to run that timestamping mechanism is going to have all kinds of legal and financial risk if anything goes wrong. So decentralizing that timestamping was a huge deal. On top of decentralizing the timestamping, what we got is we turned the puzzle process into a means of automated issuance. So on top of no one running the timestamping mechanism, no one is really issuing it. The network issues the Bitcoins to the person who solved the problem. So on top of these two things, you have distributed timestamping, which means somebody, not necessarily the same person, timestamps, and then there's also the issuance. The network issues and the network does the timestamping. This means it's censorship resistant because 4 out of 5 people may block or censor a transaction of yours, but the 5th one will go, you know what, I really don't care, and they'll mine it. So it's resistant to censorship. It's not censorship proof, but it's pretty close. And I feel like this really ties into the core value proposition of Bitcoin. Without these properties, this sort of resistance to censorship, Bitcoin isn't as powerful as it might otherwise be. So we're going to have a look at the many birds with one stone approach in Decred. So back in 2013, Adam McKenzie wrote a white paper from Memcoin to MC2 and proposed hybridizing proof of work and proof of stake, where you basically perform a proof of sacrifice. You lock your coins for a period of time, and then you get a ticket in return. And then there's a rolling lottery where these tickets are called, and then when you get your ticket called, you get to vote. And then these votes are also tied to whether a block is valid or not. So there's multiple issues that get addressed by this hybridized system. What we've done is we've taken a very similar approach to Bitcoin in the sense that we've gamified voting and turned it into a rolling lottery, where you have to do the proof of sacrifice, and then it acts as an authentication on the previous proof of work block. So let me give you an example of that. If there's a malicious miner who is, refusing to upgrade or is otherwise causing problems on the network or censoring things, the proof of stake holders can get together and say, we are going to strip this previous of its reward, basically adding a financial penalty to proof of work miners who don't do what the proof of stake miners want. So similarly, we have every vote that gets mined earns the voter a reward, similar to proof of work mining. There's also a nice property of this, which is that this sort of restores something that I feel like has been missing from the modern fiat financial system for quite some time, which is passive turns at a relatively low risk. If you go to a bank right now and you deposit money in the bank, you get almost nothing in return. With this system, you can take your funds, do something with them without going to the casino and then trading them back and forth, and actually earn a return. On top of that, it feeds into our voting system, so you're constantly giving some level of feedback into the system. Like if the system is not working the way you want, then you can start voting no, you can start piping up and disagreeing with people on the blockchain in a way that's actually enforceable cryptographically, as opposed to astroturfing on Reddit. Not one here has ever seen that go on. This is totally hypothetical. So by having proof of stake override proof of work, when proof of work miners are acting a fool, the proof of stake miners can basically censure and strip them of their rewards. What it also does is it also creates a nice governance system. In Bitcoin, you have to own typically tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of specialized computer equipment in order to participate in the governance. But in the case of Decred, you just you buy some Decred, and then there's a I'm going to qualify this. There is rush to something between 40 and 70 Decred that you need to purchase a ticket. That we're going to work on bringing the barrier to entry down. But the upshot is that with a few $1,000s, you can show up, put your money on the table, and participate in our governance system. So we all know what happens when people focus on consensus code. It's time to fight. So we focus on consensus code in a different way. We're not really keen on fighting. Fighting really gets us nowhere. To use an expression from one of my favorite hip hop artists, it's like fighting at the bus stop. Everybody's trying to get somewhere, so let's not start a conflict at the bus stop. And a lot of other people view consensus code. It's supposed to be super delicate. You're not supposed to touch it. You can't change it. You can change it. Everyone's up in arms about it. But the reality is that it's really the code that makes cryptocurrency work. Without consensus code, it's just another centralized network. So that consensus code and there being a distributed agreement of what constitutes a valid block is everything to a cryptocurrency. Otherwise, you're basically going to go back to the centralized system. And so by focusing on the consensus code, what our hope is to improve and extend the consensus code as opposed to get stuck arguing about it. So there's a couple things, caveats with consensus code. As anyone who's touched this code or looked at the code is aware, it is complex and it's very detail-oriented. If you get even minor things wrong in consensus code, it can lead to an unanticipated fork in the blockchain. And I guess there's two types of forks. There's one where one side dead ends or it jams, and there's the one where two go at the same time. There's a few ways you can fork it, but these kinds of
Which write did C++?
It's written in Golang. So Golang is kind of like.
I know what Erlang is.
Yeah. Okay. So Golang is basically similar to C. It's like C++ if you could let all of the Unix beard people write it back in the 80s. So basically C++ is, this is a bit of a detour, but C was relatively simple, super low level. C++ gives you an enormous toolkit that you can do anything with. You can skin a cat 7 ways from Sunday, and people are like, oh my God, look at you, skin that cat another way, wow. And the problem with that is that when it gets into the code, it makes code very unreadable.
Sure. So
Golang is basically going backwards and going, how can we keep everything that C gave us, but make the code as readable as possible?
Sure.
So these external measures is that we have automated consensus tests that run every time a commit is made to the consensus daemon repo. So there's DCRD, which is our consensus daemon. Every time a commit gets made to that repo, there's an automated battery of tests that run to make sure that no consensus rules are broken. So that allows us to work on consensus code without going, oh my God, is it going to flip the ship over? Are we going to sink it? Or are we going to knock ourselves off the railroad track? So these full block tests that confirm there are no forking bugs, they're going to get you 90% of the way there. You can't be 100% certain that there isn't a forking bug, but you can be very close to it. So we get as close as we reasonably can, and we beat it up, we test it a lot, and then the code goes into master. So let's say I propose a consensus, or we propose a consensus change on the network. In order for that consensus change to occur, what we have is we have to have an affirmative vote by proof of stake miners. So consensus rules only change when the holder of the currency approve. So that's why we have a miner giving us a thumbs up. We'll see him again later.
Is that a simple majority? Is it a majority?
We do a super majority. We do 75%. I just wanted to put this up before I get so anyone who's familiar with RoboCop, the original, mind you, is familiar with the issues that come up when you try to merge a human and a machine. And this is one of them. Apparently, he has dreams and he gets really upset. So, spoiler alert. So, the proof of work, the hybrid proof of work proof of stake layer is it's opt-in on the proof of stake. And the reason we decided to do opt-in is that we felt like you have to do something to actually get a reward from your proof of stake participation. It can't just be, well, I have coins. That just creates sort of a nepotism and I was here firstism, and whoever showed up first has the biggest pile. So what we did is we said it's opt-in, you lock your coins to get tickets, and then the tickets become eligible for a rolling lottery that occurs every block. So on every block, there's 5 votes called, and then the votes come in, but the votes apply to the previous block. And that's for sort of logistical reasons. If you look at it, you can't vote on the same block that you're mining and so on. And then people will also be incentivized to not let your tickets in, your votes in. So the price of tickets goes up and down. So that it's sort of like proof of work in that sense, because the difficulty goes up and down because you're trying to target a certain time period between start of one interval and the end of another, and then you can rescale the proof of work difficulty such that it adjusts over time. And we end up doing a similar thing for proof of stake. So the subsidy of each block is split 3 ways, and this is because of the various things I mentioned earlier. We decided to do 60% to proof of work because they actually have to buy hardware, and they're not using this hardware to do their normal computing tests. This is special hardware that has to be maintained, whether it's GPUs or ASICs or whatever. So we figured it made the most sense to give the most subsidy to proof of work. We give 30% to proof of stake because we felt like it was a strong rate of return, but it wasn't absurdly high. So that's why we ended up going with 30% to proof of stake, and then 10% to the development organization because, to sort of rewind the clock about 100 years. I feel like in terms of governments, if you can't do it with 10%, you probably shouldn't be doing it, is kind of the way I feel. So that's why we set it at 10%. We figure, hey, if it ends up that all of this, that this is set too high, we can dial it down later. So the first vote bit in every ticket addresses the validity of the previous block. The previous block, oh, you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the distribution of the 10%. How is that voted upon? How that money is distributed?
Not yet, but it will be soon. We're basically, we started with a centralized entity to collect those, to collect the subsidy, and then I'd estimate 12 months tops, maybe 6 months if we're doing it well. It will be fully decentralized, so that the control of the funds will be dependent on votes that proof of stake users cast. Okay, so beyond voting on whether the previous proof of work block is valid, we've added additional vote bits which allow users to vote on other consensus changes that are coming up. So if there are 2 proposed consensus changes coming up, we basically bolt on extra vote bits to allow people to vote for those, so that at the next interval they can vote yes, no, or abstain, or potentially other values, because there's more than 2 ways some votes could go. You could be like, well, do you want the logo to be orange, yellow, or black? And then then there's 3 choices, or abstain, which is So the motivation here is really to get out from under proof of work miners, in the sense that proof of work miners dictate if, when, and which consensus changes occur. In theory, if the miners of Bitcoin wanted to start turning the knob themselves and going where they want, it could happen, but it's a question of whether everybody else follows. But they can also block things. There's a whole lot that proof of work miners can do. They can also do DOS attacks, essentially mine empty blocks, and then or go, you know what, politically I disagree with what you're doing. I'm not going to include your transaction in my blocks, and then make a short denial of service. So the consensus system is basically a stick with which the proof of stake miners can punish the proof of work miners. Yeah, and on top of that, it also gives a nice feedback mechanism, in the sense that on an ongoing basis, as the chain advances, if anything is really going sideways and people are unhappy with it, they can vote about it, they can change it. As opposed to going, these rules are written in stone, we can go, ooh, that one rule, that's really poorly thought out, and we can actually change that. It takes a few months to change it, but it ultimately allows Decred to evolve in a way that other cryptocurrencies cannot. That is that, if I wanted to go, we're going to make a hard fork change and flip the switch, I could do that. And a lot of other cryptocurrencies have done that, whether it's Ethereum or Monero or I guess Dash has done it a couple times in the past. But the game being, it's not me throwing that switch. It's me wiring that switch up and then going, everybody gets to vote, and then we determine which way the switch is thrown. So hard fork voting is what I'm talking about here with these consensus changes. Instead of being stuck wanting to only make soft fork changes so that we never knock people off the network, we acknowledge that these consensus rules, while it's nice to make soft fork changes, ultimately there's a lot of changes that have to be made that are deeper changes, that are hard fork changes. And plus, when you make a soft fork, it really constrains the kind of consensus changes you can make. You can't really add structure. You have to overwrite something else, and then you have to reallocate an opcode. So this is basically, it's built to go, we can literally pull any piece of the currency out and swap another piece in, and not be constrained by whether it's a soft or a hard fork. So the real goal is to address governance in the kind of problems that Bitcoin has, and the kind of problems that other cryptocurrencies do have, or will soon have once they have enough money and enough people arguing about it. And Decred tomorrow is actually the day the first hard fork change will activate on Decred. So the process has occurred where basically it was proposed, it was put up for a vote, the vote passed, and then it locked in, and then it's going to activate, and that's tomorrow. So this presentation is timely, and it's a little stressful too, because I know there's all this stuff that's going on tomorrow, so I'm trying to do well here, and then also keep an eye on that. So systems like Dash, for example, have run they have voting, and the voting can soft signal things like, we want to bump the block size to 2 megabytes, and that's great. And what it means is, it means there's the will of the users. The will of the users is confirmed as, we want to do this hard fork. Then the implementation of the hard fork is left up to a centralized entity, whoever's in charge of the project or whoever's in charge of the repo. And what we decided to do is we don't want to have our hands on the switch. We just want to wire the switch up and then let everyone choose how the switch is thrown. So instead of signaling, we wired it right into the consensus. The consensus and when and how. Consensus can change as a function of these proof of stake votes. So this one's a bit, I'm going to qualify this. Before we start work on anything that's going to be irreversible or is potentially a lot of dev work, like integrating a Lightning Network, we're going to put up a vote for people to go, do you really want us to do this, before we start the work? The idea being, if nobody wants us to do the work and the vote will never pass, what is the point of doing the development work to get everything ready for it? And what we ended up doing is we did this one on-chain, but in the future, once we have the system fork, we will be doing soft signaling stuff like this off-chain. We just don't have the infrastructure for it yet. So, you know, as we've seen with Bitcoin, even things that in my opinion are relatively minor, like whether we have 1 megabyte or 2 megabyte blocks, or whether we have SegWit or we don't, these things are horribly contentious and people get super emotional about them, and there's really no quick way to resolve these things unless the proof of work miners, you know, decide to, you know, do what Bitcoin Core wants or do what the SegWit 2x people want, and so on. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make a, you know, a project that flexes where, you know, if problems come up, and if you know, if there's an obstacle, we can detour around it, as opposed to going like, oh, we can only go straight at it and everybody's going to fight. And so being able to flex and, you know, flex and change as time advances, we consider to be very important. That's it. I thought I was going to say something else, not happening. Okay. So the Bitcoin Core repository has become so politicized, it really is legitimately difficult to decouple bad ideas from ideas that the Bitcoin developers just don't want to implement. And I say that because, you know, you look at before Blockstream existed, people had a sort of an array of opinions on the topic. As soon as Blockstream happens, they all have the same opinion, or most of them have the same opinion. And then it brings into question, is it the money that's driving this decision, or is it actually their opinion and somebody just convinced them otherwise? So, you know, that became so heated, and as a person in the space, I just watched it and I'm like, this is fighting at the bus stop, is really the way I felt about it. And that's why we ended up going, you know what, we're never going to get these kinds of consensus changes that we need to do what we have in mind into Bitcoin, so we pretty much have to do it in altcoin. As Decred evolves and improves, there's going to be more consensus code changes that occur. For example, the proof of work, difficulty adjustment algorithm is, it's so-so. It could use some adjustment. So, you know, over time, we're going to look back and find parts of the infrastructure that we're like, this really wasn't so great. Maybe we could have made a better decision, and we'll go back and we'll change it and we'll improve it, as opposed to being like, well, we're stuck with it. We've always had it like that. The other thing that we ended up doing was, and this feeds into your point of who asked about the majority versus, that was you? Okay. So what we ended up doing was we wanted a system where we could fork, but there's not that awful risk of, you know, the etc versus the, or, you know, Ethereum Classic versus Ethereum. We didn't want to end up in that situation where there's these two competing chains and then you can't really tell which is which ends up happening with proof of work. With proof of work, if somebody goes, you know what, I'm going to hard fork this chain and make a hard fork, the only barrier they have to overcome is they just have to sort of like slug it out with proof of work until they can get to the next difficulty adjustment interval, and then it starts speeding up. And there's no constraints on how much of the user base do you have to go with you. By hybridizing proof of work and proof of stake, what we end up doing is we end up making the cost for maintaining a minority hard fork much more expensive. Because what ends up happening is that, let's say 75% of the people want to go one direction, and then 25 want to go the other direction. What happens is the 75 that go, you know, the way of the supermajority, they end up taking their votes offline for the forked one that only has 25%. What this does is this dramatically drives up the cost of maintaining a long-lived hard fork without the majority of the proof of stake miners. So just to give you an idea, the reason we ended up setting the threshold for this at 75% is that we wanted to set it low enough so that some people can disagree. I think it's important that, you know, you don't have to have everyone agree to make a decision. If we all have to agree to make a decision, nothing's going to happen. However, we also don't want it to be too low for the reason that we want it to be expensive to make a minority hard fork and maintain it. So what we did is we looked at the curve that took the percentage of yes votes you need as to make a change, and then we looked at the cost of maintaining that long-lived minority fork. What we found is that at the 75% level, if 75% approve, and 25% don't, and then we assume we have 25% of the stake online in the competing fork, the costs go up by a factor of 40x at a minimum. So basically, the cost of keeping the chain going with the majority is cheap, and we make it super expensive to go the other direction. So making hard fork voting work is pretty complex. It took us about a year to go from launch in February 2016 to making it work in the first release we had where it worked was in, I want to say it was in April 2017. And this is because you basically have to do a stepwise upgrade. We split instead of doing the Bitcoin Core approach where there's a single monolithic daemon that enforces consensus rules and handles all of your coins and your private keys and so on, we had split these two in btcsuite into a consensus daemon and a wallet. So DCRD is our consensus daemon, DCR wallet is our wallet. But votes are handled by the wallet. So we need DCRD and DCR wallet of the network to basically upgrade according to a stepwise process so that we can get these changes voted. The idea being, if your wallet can't understand what it's voting on, we probably don't want to upgrade just yet. So people's wallets signal that they know what they're voting on, and the daemons signal that they understand the blocks with the new protocol, or with the new version. So this is in more detail. So the first step is proof of work miners signal they have upgraded to the latest release with the latest block version in the block header. This is identical to Bitcoin. So in Bitcoin, if people are if proof of work miners are upgrading, what they're doing is they're signaling, I have this version of the consensus rules activated, and I'm ready to do it once I hit a certain threshold. So we do the same thing. So this process actually borrows hugely from BIP9. Miners signal they have upgraded by using the latest vote on their version on their votes. And what this is about is that, so there's consensus daemon DCRD. Miners run this and then they mine against it, or they basically generate templates and then push them out to people in the mining pool. Proof of stake miners, on the other hand, are the people who actually vote on these issues. So in order for us to feel safe upgrading, we need signals, we need data from the proof of stake miners that they go, listen, I know there's an upgrade coming, and they signal that by putting a version on their votes. Then the votes get tallied for the new set of vote bits. So what happens is that after these two steps happen, we click over to, it's either time to vote or almost time to vote. And I can get into this in more detail later, but I'll gloss over this. There's an RCI, and an RCI is called a rule change interval. Rule change interval is roughly 4 weeks long. So we could wait 0, 1, 2, or 3 weeks until the actual voting on issues, on the new issues starts. And then once a full RCI has passed and there have been votes tallied, if one of these things is over 75% yes, it gets activated. If it's over 75% no, it gets permanently killed. And if it's between 75% yes and 75% no, then it rolls over and the voting continues on the next RCI. And again, this is similar to BIP9, albeit with fixed intervals as opposed to rolling intervals. So once the full RCI passes so something gets voted in yes, there's another 4 weeks between the yes and the activation of the rules. And that gives people time to upgrade. Like let's say you really didn't want to upgrade, but now there's actually a warning. It's locked in, and if you don't upgrade in the next 4 weeks, you're going to be forked off the network.
And what happens if the proof of work miners never signal?
So that's funny. This is funny you mention that. So it is possible and conceivable that proof of work miners will not signal, or they'll try to block an upgrade. Now, in this instance, this is a perfect scenario for use of proof of stake to punish proof of work miners. What can happen is that, like, let's say miners A and B say, I don't want to upgrade, I want to be in a stick in the mud. Proof of stake miners can then go, you know what, we're going to vote no on every block you mine from here on out. And eventually, once that hits a threshold, once 60% or more of or actually it's over 50% of the votes on one of these blocks is no, then they get their proof of work reward stripped. So the way we use an economic incentive to force people to upgrade. We haven't had to do this yet, but hey, maybe it'll happen. Anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what happens if you get like mining centralization like Bitcoin has, and you have they have enough stake there that they can defend, that 50% of voting down their economic incentives.
But the caveat here is that just like with the long-lived hard fork scenario that I went through, where it's maintaining one is super expensive, whereas the main chain is not. The issue that comes up there is, okay, so 50%. I'm going to make sure I'm going to answer the right question. Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, so like, if there's proof of stake voters, and there's a lot of people that just don't care to vote, then the miners are a large enough percentage of the voting population that they can then vote against, say no, these are valid blocks.
So the issue there is there's a paper called Proof of Activity, and it was authored by Charlie Lee, Alex Mizrahi. I can't remember all the authors. I want to say there's two other authors that I forgot. Manny Rosenfeld. And there's one more. But that paper actually addresses exactly what you're talking about, which is that there is a collusive attack vector, which is it's roughly equivalent to the 51% attack. But what it is that it's colluding proof of work and proof of stake to basically do things like you described, block the penalty votes, and to more importantly manipulate the network and sort of allow people to double spend and just cause badness all over the place. The upshot with it is that it's actually far more expensive to do that than it is to just do that with ASICs right now for Bitcoin. The game being that if you look at the percentages of stake and the percentages of hash power that you need to have, you need enough of both of those to get to the point where you to really take over the network. It ends up being, I think, roughly 5 to 10 times more expensive as a result of combining these two things. In fact, what you pointed out is actually one of the things that led me to go, you know what, I think we really should do this. That is, when I was looking at it, I thought the same thing. I'm like, is this really any more secure than Bitcoin? And it didn't really look like it, but then when you read the proof of activity paper, you're like, oh, aha, somebody actually sat down and did all the math. So, we have the luxury of going, okay, it is as safe as I had hoped it would be.
And going back to the other, where you have that hard fork where 75 goes one way and 25 is really expensive, like couldn't that 25% just hard fork again and change the code so it's not 40 times more expensive?
They could. Now, to some extent, consensus rules are arbitrary, but the way I see it is this: is that the more you start changing things, the more you change the value proposition for the users. If you're just going to start turning all the dials willy-nilly, you're not going to. I think you're going to lose the crowd very quickly. That is, sure, there might be that 5 or 10% who want to run with it, but I think that at that point, it's really not even like, it's not even similar to the F classic versus F. It's really turned into, I've made a new altcoin and forked it off of DRED. So it is possible. So that's a fair point.
Two things actually. One, are you planning this as like a platform where you'll have smart contracts and all that, or is it more of a currency?
We're focusing in on more of the store value and transmission value. Smart contracts, I have a bit of a different opinion on them. It's a bit of a detour, but smart contracts, I feel like, although in principle, they're Turing complete, you can do whatever you want with them. In principle, people really only do a few things with them, as much as there is this freedom, right? You go, I have a smart contract that'll do my laundry and make me sandwiches. And the reality is that all that people really seem to care about is ICOs. So I'm sure if you looked at the smart contracts that are on the Ethereum chain, there's probably 1 or 2 types that dominate the usage. So as much as I like the freedom and the theoretical ability to do anything with a smart contract, in practice people only do a few things with smart contracts.
And the second is what would happen if you got like a staking monopoly, like whales bought up a bunch of DCred?
It can happen, but again, this is sort of the 51% attack vector. It would drive the price total nuts. There's a lot of, I want to say roughly 35 to 40% of DCred is currently staked. So that's almost, that's between a third and getting towards a half of the supply that's just off the market entirely. You couldn't show up and buy it. So that would, I think the price would go nuts. And so it always is possible. You could buy enough proof of work and enough proof of stake to really mess with the network. But then if you spend all that money buying it, why would you do that? And rather than just sit back and profit and build it out with us.
Yeah, right.
Can I just get a clarification? The first thing that you guys were talking about was a scenario where proof of work miners use their block rewards to become proof of stake miners and gain an advantage there as well. Am I understanding that correctly? The first thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the proof of activity paper addresses that. It goes through the threat modeling. Keep moving. Okay. So, give you a little bit of the PDP-1. I feel like that's kind of what we're doing. The financial operating system we have only works so well, and we got to keep working on it. So what I'm going to talk about is what Decred has already done. So we've created solutions for several existing problems. The governance problem, the tragedy of the commons, and in the future we're going to continue solving the problems that we continue to have. You fix one thing, you're bound to find another. So we give the opt-in on-chain representation that allows you to override the proof of work miners. And basically, it gives gives people who hold Decred an ability to write to the ledger and then beat up the proof of work miners if they need to. With hard fork voting, we can continuously improve the code base and add more features. For example, if at some later point we wanted to add Turing complete smart contracts, we could do it. Right now, that isn't really where we're at because I feel like it's still very new technology and it adds extra complexity. And then we've got money to do it. So there's a development organization that gets regular subsidy payments on an ongoing basis. So where are we going now is a decent question. So the next several things, if anyone's read the 2017 roadmap I pushed out in January, is the things that are still in the pipeline. We've got to create a proposal system so that people can engage with us. I mean, for all we know, some of the best consensus changes and ideas are just going to be, somebody does a drive-by commenting and goes, "What about this?" and then punches something in. I can't say that I have all the best ideas, so we're going to start, taking input from the community on a continuous basis with the proposals. We'll be integrating Lightning Network by adding SegWit and getting that ball rolling. We're going to decentralize control of development organization funds. Now, there's a reason we decided to do this later as opposed to in one big bang. It's systems like Dash did a lot of these things in one big bang, right? They have a proposal system. They have a decentralized control of the dev work funds. But the way I see it is that I wanted to do this very, very carefully so that we can make sure each step in this process is dead on, as opposed to going big bang, here's a system and you can use it. We started by decentralizing a step at a time. So we're going to make the proposal system. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the DAO problem can't happen. For example, that there's some massive amount of funds in a multi-sig address or in a pay to script hash, and then somebody just figures out how to siphon it all out. We don't want that to happen. So we're gonna be very careful with that one. We're gonna enhance user privacy. I'm not gonna say a whole lot about it, but it'll be different than what everybody else is doing. And this one is behind schedule, the Carib disintegration. There's a project we've been running on the side, and I hope we'll have it out before the end of 2017. And the upshot is, I feel like there's serious freedom of speech problems on the internet, and we can hopefully address some of those with this.
Can you talk a little bit about DCR time?
Oh, sure. Okay, it's question time. So one of the things that we did recently is, as part of the proposal system, we made a time-stamping mechanism called DCR time. It basically, it's a service that people can freely use. You submit what is it? I want to say it's a 32-byte string. So you submit a 32-byte hash to the service. Then it accumulates hashes from a bunch of people using the service, creates a Merkle tree, hashes them down, and then takes the Merkle root and puts that on chain. Now this is very similar to Peter Todd's open timestamps, but it has some extra magic in it. One of the extra pieces of magic it has is that so the Merkle tree gets hashed down to the root gets put on chain. When you query the service after that Merkle root that links to your hash is once that's anchored and mined, then the service returns with the Merkle path from your hash to the root, which allows you to prove demonstrably that you submitted that hash in a certain time range. So the point of that is that, you know, if you want to timestamp documents or anything, you can do that for free. And then what we're going to be using it for is we're going to use it in the proposal system so that, like, let's say you have great idea X and you submit it to us, and, you know, we want to be sketchy and try to go, oh, you didn't submit it and this and that, or erase things from our proposal system. Let's say, you know, we get into a big fight with someone and we go, we're going to make this political, we're going to erase your proposal. We can't do that because of DCR time. DCR time will basically drop an anchor in the proposal system every so often so that you can be sure we're not rewriting history with the proposal system.
Just a clarification on how the penalty for malicious miners works.
Mm-hmm.
So let me paraphrase and then you tell me where I'm wrong. The way that I understood it, so a malicious miner does something that proof of stake miners don't like. So the proof of stake miners, the ones that have a lottery ticket, 5 of them get selected randomly to vote on whether that miner of the last block actually gets the reward or not. And so if those 5 randomly chosen voters say, no, miner, you're not getting this reward, and enough 5 vote blocks happen, then the miner loses it, or is it after the first block?
It's after the first block. Let me make sure I say this right. The rule is over 50% of the votes need to be no. So you can have as little as 3 votes on a block. That's the minimum we allow. You can have 4 or you can have 5. The idea being at least most of the people need to be voting in order for it to be considered a valid block. We're going to restrict attention to the case where all 5 vote. Let's say all 5 vote, 3 vote no. What happens is that those 3 vote no, then the proof of work, the Coinbase the proof of work Coinbase from the previous block is invalidated, so that, you know, after the maturity that normally, you know, comes when you mine, at the end of that it's 0. They don't get the mining subsidy. So it's instantaneous, and it applies to particular blocks. So if someone does something sketchy with block N, then they'll know that they're getting stripped of it by block N plus 1. And then it also allows people to go, who mined block N, and then they go, oh, well, miner A, I don't like miner A, and then they just, you know, they can vote no.
And so because 5 proof of stake miners are randomly getting chosen to vote on whether the proof of work miner of the previous block actually gets the reward or not, that is sort of like a check and balance system, so that proof of work miners with enough proof of stake can't collude on their own reward system?
Well, they can collude, but what it does is it prevents proof of work miners from really, you know, if the proof of work miners start doing stuff like blocking transactions or mining empty blocks, that's a big problem, and it basically allows you to financially penalize them when they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Now, in theory, you could also punish people for doing nothing. But, you know, I think that because it's a randomly selected 5 votes, it's kind of hard to do that. You need to, basically, the upshot is you need to upset 50% or greater of everyone who's a proof of stake miner to start getting their blocks in the ballot.
And then, sorry, just one more question. So on the way that a consensus change would get adopted, so is it basically like the code is already merged into the protocol, and then the proof of stake miners just vote to activate that code?
Correct. So what we do is that before these votes happen, we write the code to make the consensus changes. So there's old consensus, so like, you know, let's call it consensus 1 and consensus 2. Consensus 2 will only activate on an affirmative vote. So on an affirmative vote, instead of the consensus code path going here, it goes through the other path. And so, you know, it's all pre-coded, so that, like I said, via my analogy, basically we wire up the switch, and then the proof of stake users get to choose how to flip it.
And then does the old code get automatically deleted?
It does not, and the reason it does not is because when you download the old chain, you need to know that consensus rule 1 used to apply up to, you know, block N, and then consensus rule 2 applies on block N plus 1 and above. So that you know, the one way to look at it is that there's scaffolding around it that says if there's a consensus, if the proof of stake voters vote for this, activate it. But what we end up doing is that once we move past there, we can strip the scaffolding off and just go, if block is greater than this rule applies.
Little challenge for you today. About half of the audience is new to the organization here today. So I wonder if you could just very quickly, I know this is going to be a challenge, very quickly talk about what the current crisis of governance is in Bitcoin today. This is a particularly timely talk in terms of governance of cryptocurrencies. So could you sort of summarize for maybe some new people who don't know?
I'll try to keep it super brief because we can fill a whole hour with this.
Right.
The super brief summary is that Bitcoin doesn't have a governance mechanism. The only governance mechanism it had was proof of work. If you read the original white paper, Satoshi says, well, since we can't do one person, one vote because of Sybil attacks, we need to do some kind of, you know, there needs to be some kind of consensus mechanism in order to determine whether a block is valid or not. And then one CPU, one vote seems good enough because it's relatively simple. You know, we work with computers all the time, and, you know, that works. So it started out working. Now we're at the point where basically I think it's three groups really are kind of vying for control. There's SegWit 2x, which is sort of a business world broker deal between the miners and the businesses. Then there's the pure SegWit, which is the Bitcoin core position, which is we refuse to increase the block size. We're only going to add SegWit. Then there's the miner position, which is you guys signed an agreement in Hong Kong and you said you would do both at the same time. That is bump to 2 megabyte, 2 meg hard fork plus SegWit. And so all three of these groups are basically vying for control of both the narrative and the consensus code in Bitcoin. And now technically,
and it's all about scaling, like getting more transactions per second right now.
Exactly. And so it's really, it all cooks down to an argument about scaling. How are we going to grow the network? How can 1 billion people use Bitcoin? And there's, there are different views. And the funny part to me is how similar they all are, but they're different enough that people really have, put their foot in one camp or the other. And so it's basically a bunch of people fighting at the bus stop right now, which is that we have this great technology and it's just without a formalized binding governance mechanism, it ends up that everybody just fights and fights. I mean, another way to resolve it is with proof of work miners, but since proof of work miners have a monopoly on write access to the ledger, if they want to block, they can formally veto anything. So that's sort of the way the game is right now. So basically everybody's fighting, and this has been going on now for what, 2 years?
I think like 3.
We're almost 3 years. And
yes. All right, quick question and a more complicated question. First of all, I'm wondering about the when a proof of stake miner votes to strip a proof of work miner of the reward. How does that happen exactly? Is it someone sitting there pushing buttons? Is it something you set? So you just say, hey, I hate this miner. Don't always vote no on him. Like, how does that actually happen and implemented?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And the way it works right now is that it would be a manual bit setting. But the only reason that we have it, as a manual setting right now is that it's basically the belt the abusive parent never takes out and goes, I have a belt in that closet, and I swear I will get that belt out. And you never see the belt. But the reality is if you're going to punish someone, you need an automated framework for issuing punishment. So the infrastructure to conditionally apply the belt is missing. So, let me give you an example. Right now, there are problems with the proof of work miners. Let's say the problem started to crop up. What we would do, as developers, is that we would make a new release of the code that allows people to apply filters and go, if block is from this guy, vote no. And so we just haven't added it because we haven't needed to. But I swear that belt's in the closet.
All right, and I have one more slightly complicated questions. I don't think I entirely understood how you're talking about there being a fork and how you avoid chain split and it being very expensive to be on the lesser chain. How exactly is it more expensive? Can you break that down for me a little bit?
Yeah, so the way it works is, remember what I was saying about the votes? There needs to be 3, 4, or 5 votes on a block in order for it to be valid.
You should use the Charlie Lee analogy if you can remember it.
Oh, I can't blend that in right. Hold on. Too much complexity. What was your question again?
So are you saying it's more expensive to be on the lesser chain because of?
Okay, it's because of this. Think about it like this. The minority chain ends up with 25% of the votes of the tickets on it. So when they call 5 tickets every time, there's a very high probability you're going to get less than 3 votes. You're going to get 1, 2, or 0 votes because there's 75% of them are offline on your minority chain. So what that does is that drives the orphan rate up. And that's how we got, then there's a calculation you can do with a little bit of combinatorics that goes from the percentage of the tickets you have to what's the probability you get 3, 4, or 5 votes. So,
so you're saying it's much more likely that a miner would get stripped because they're block reward on the.
Well, like let me give you an example. You mine 1 block, you get the approvals. Then someone, the way it works when you're mining is you have to wait until you get enough votes. So block N gets mined. Somebody's trying to start mining block N plus 1. They go, give me your votes, guys, and 0, 1, or 2 votes come the majority of the time. So what it means is then you have to go back and remine block N to extend.
So we just don't have enough votes to ever get the money.
Correct, or put another way, they have to mine the same block over and over again until you get enough online votes for it to be approved. So
wait, you need the votes to approve the block, not just to penalize the.
Correct. You need 3 or more votes in order to approve the block.
Okay.
What would stop a proof of work miner from just switching their address if they were penalized? Is there still like proof of stake mechanism to allow them to identify themselves and make it difficult for them to change their address?
My read with proof of work miners is now, if you look at most cryptocurrencies, that it's split into mining pools, right? In a lot of cases, so there might be 3 or 4 or 5 or N pools. Sometimes people will mine and you can't tell, you have no idea who they are, right? They're independent miners. These people exist. They're harder to recognize than the mining pools. So most mining pools, especially for altcoins, I can't speak about. I'm not super familiar with the Bitcoin mining because that was before my time, and you can typically identify these things. People could do things to try to obfuscate their identity, but then they have the latency delay. Like let's say you want to ram it through Tor and like obfuscate it. Well, then when you do that, it becomes a transparency problem, not just for your users, because the people who are your miners in the pool want to know which blocks you mine, but then on top of that, there's like an N-second delay from routing that stuff through Tor.
Well, normally if you're going to probably run an attack via proof of work, you're probably going to have like a botnet or something, to be able to have all that hashing power. Mm-hmm. So you can switch IP addresses, you can generate new addresses.
It's possible, but because the majority of our mining is done through GPUs, there's only so much GPU mining power you can get out of a botnet. Like botnet, like if this was Monero and we were doing a CPU mining, then you're spot on, which is that you can basically have 50,000 computers all over just grinding their CPUs and really get a huge edge. Yeah, my refrigerator's running a little hot. Yeah.
So Cyancoin recently announced an Obelisk ASIC miner for their specific altcoin, and I'm wondering if there's any plans someday maybe for a Decred Blake 56 ASIC miner. I think Dave Collins had said maybe someday that would happen.
It definitely could happen. If the project continues doing well, it probably will happen. But it's a big fixed cost investment, right? You have to throw typically a few $1 million at this, and so you can ask the question: would I rather buy a few $1 million worth of Decred, or would I rather buy a few $1 million worth of mining hardware that is I'm going to have to upgrade and that becomes an arms race? So.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you're thinking of proof of stake. Proof of stake miners might be more selfish than you're giving them credit for, in the sense that if I'm a proof of stake miner and my ticket finally gets called to this lottery, I'm kind of voting against my own interest by being a hero and voting against my own block when I finally got called. Second of all, if the fork happens and you say there's 25% on this chain, 75% on this chain, and 25% on that chain, selfish proof of stake miners, they can use their stake to vote both chains. If they think there's value in both chains, they can participate in both of them if they want to.
It is conceivable.
Yeah.
More questions? Are we done?
No, 2 questions. What is the upper limit for Decred? I know.
Issuance.
Yeah, Bitcoin's about 21 million.
Yeah, we set the same cap, roughly 21 million.
Okay, and the current speed of the network?
Hash rate? Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't watch the hash
It's like
rate.
130 terahash.
130 terahash. Okay.
Somebody has a question online.
The internet.
Plans for Schnorr signatures in the Decred pipeline, and probably.
I would say yes, but I would say there's enough stuff in our pipeline to keep us busy for the next several months. But Schnorr signatures are definitely something that we've been planning on adding.
And what's the benefit of Schnorr signatures?
I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with the details of Schnorr signatures. I want to say it's things like verification speed and size. So, as an example, one thing that happens is that when we spend the dev work subsidy, because it's out of a 3-of-3 multi-sig, the transactions are gigantic. So it's like a whole bunch of like 3 inputs of 3 Decred. Those are giant transactions. Schnorr signatures would definitely shrink them some. Anything else?
What was the result of the SDIF algo shift for the vote?
Oh, it was a 98% yes.
So maybe like along the less technical side of things, like what kind of market is Decred planning to target? Because I know you guys recently hired Gautam, the new marketing lead.
Yeah.
Like what are his strategies to kind of get Decred out there to the public?
Well, so Gautam has had he's had a limited role so far, but really the person who's responsible for the majority of our marketing, our marketing lead is Marguerite, who's in the back row there. So she's normally camera shy, but I figured I'd point her out because she's here. But in terms of increasing our reach, I mean, one of the most effective tools that we've seen to date is actually Marguerite's puzzles that she coordinates. So she makes these what are they? Crypto puzzles, basically, where something is encoded into an image or into a video, and then it's a game for everyone to solve it and then get a private key, which presumably unlocks the Decred. So that's one of it's been extremely successful today, and I'd like to thank Marguerite for all of the hard work. But that's in terms of marketing, what we've been doing too is that we've been a bit cautious with marketing from the perspective of you can come out of the box and spend an enormous amount of money marketing. I mean, if you look at how venture capital companies run, you could spend millions and millions of dollars like that marketing and really not get very far. So what we're trying to do is we're easing into this, because when you look at this, we've really only had a non-trivial amount of money to work with for like 3 months. So we're putting our toe in, and then we'll get deeper into it and spend more money.
So target like the crypto people first, and then maybe slowly branch out to like
the
normies.
Well, it's the low-hanging fruit for us,
right?
Because like if we're gonna go out on the street and be like, you gotta buy some Decred, people will be like, I have no clue what you're talking about. Don't touch me. Yeah, get off my lawn. I'm not on your lawn. It's a metaphor.
Can you talk a bit about the funding to date of Decred and how most of it is actually funded?
Oh, so I funded the development personally through Company Zero for most of the development work that's going on between February. The pre-launch stuff, I got coins in the not in the ICO, I was gonna say in the pre-mine. There were coins I got in the pre-mine. Then I paid for development work from February 2016 until the end of April 2017. About $1 million. And so as a result, we have an enormous amount of money in our development organization, something like, like $9 million or something.
In a similar vein, where within the developer subsidy how do you break that up now, and where is that distributed between for paying for current development and versus marketing, and how that works?
So what we've done is that, per my earlier comments about, dipping a toe in and taking it gradually, we've been steadily spending more money on marketing and, our sort of community outreach programs, things like sending people to conferences. It's, it very quickly adds up when you send people to conferences. And like, let's take today. I have the luxury of speaking to all of you, and it's very nice, and I really appreciate it. But I feel like, let's say I go and I have a booth at a conference. I've gone to some cryptocurrency conferences back in 2013, 2014. And I've found that it's very difficult, to get out there and connect with people. So I'm being careful about how much money we spend on marketing, but it's steadily grown over time. And so sort of relatively speaking, the development expenditures have grown a little bit, but the marketing has grown a lot, and it will continue to grow a lot.
So, not my personal opinion, but just in this whole debate today around like firing the Bitcoin core developers, what if the community rejects proposed development from and development that is being funded from the subsidy? How would that be handled?
So the way governance works, right, is that the governance, the first step we really wanted to get to was allowing everyone to vote on consensus changes. The reason being is that those are the most important changes. So if the dev team comes up with some wild, crazy change and everybody wants to say no, they have the sovereignty to do that. We're giving people control over the major changes. It's sort of like, if I was the Federal Reserve and I wanted to start monkeying with the interest rate, and instead of just, me being like, oh, I'm in charge and turning the knob, it would be, now everybody gets to vote on whether we make that change. So that layer of governance is what we added first. Then we're going to basically make it so whatever people end up voting on for hard fork changes and a number of other minor stuff can all be handled with the proposal system. But just like you point out, let's say the development group goes off the deep end and just starts doing super kooky stuff. What we haven't gotten to is ultimately that there could be something that is effectively a vote of no confidence in the group of contractors that Decred uses, or some subgroup within it, and then they are outed. So the way I see it is that before I set up a guillotine that may be used against me, I want to make sure that I want to make sure it's a well-built guillotine and it's quick and I'm not like stuck there. Oh, you only went halfway. So we'll try to build the infrastructure for that later on. But ultimately, that is kind of the plan. That is just like any other governance body, whether it's the EU, the US, Russia, or whatever. Is most of these places don't really have a mechanism for going, well, you know what, I just want to start over. But we're going to have to add that in order to sort of keep continuity, flowing. Because you can't really have a violent revolution with cryptocurrency, can you?
And you have the Constitution, right?
Yes.
Do you remember it by heart?
Not all of it, but and I'll be honest, I think I overpromised a bit with the Constitution. But we're going to be adding. We're going to try to line things up as closely with the original Constitution.
You can vote to change that Constitution, right?
Sure.
Hard fork to a new Constitution.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but per the guillotine comment, I want to make sure it's proper, right?
How long did it take you from physics to learn all the crypto stuff? All that super complicated.
I got really into open source software back in like 02, 03, 04 when I was in grad school. I hated doing physics at the University of Chicago. I didn't like it. I didn't like the department. The department didn't like me. I got out. I spent an enormous amount of time on the computer. I build my own machines from parts, and then I've been my own system administrator since 02, so that's 15 years. And the same applies to a number of businesses that I run. I used to do an online backup thing called CipherTight. It's basically like high security online backups. It was an abject failure, and I had to shut it down.
She's gonna study it.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was really cool, and then I had a dev team that was already doing something that had some overlap. And then I was like, you know what? This online storage thing is junk. It's a waste of money. What can we pivot to that's sort of like that's hot and interesting and overlaps with the skills that my developers have? And they're like, I was like, have you guys looked at Bitcoin? And then it just turned into just more and more and more. Oh, we got to do this, and then the whole team came over and started working on it.
That was btcsuite.
That was btcsuite, or it is.
Could you talk about some of your developers, maybe ones you had during btcsuite, and then, I mean, briefly, you don't have to give names if you're not comfortable with that, but like just.
I can do that. So I have one guy who really pulls the train. His name is Dave Collins. Dave is a former Dell employee. He used to work for the military. He used to work on military firmware. He's done a whole bunch of different things. Used to be a helicopter service guy in the Army. So he can I think he can take apart a Chinook helicopter and put most of it back together and do all the tests. Or at least that's what he tells me. I don't know what it was he really did. Huh?
Most of it back together.
Yeah, most of it back together. Oh, what about this part? I'm not sure.
There's some parts left over.
So
2 steering wheels?
So that's Dave Collins. Dave is the perfectionist out of the group. Then I have Marco Piraboom. He's the CTO. He's more the firebrand. He'll stand up and say kind of crazy stuff. He's the prototype guy. If you need a prototype to go from 0 to working, he's the person to talk to because it doesn't have to be perfect. And then I have my brother Alex. He works on the GUI. I could go on for too long. I think I'll just leave it there.
Who's roast beef? Roast beef or something?
Oh, roast beef is Lalu. He is a dev, and he is out on the West Coast, and he works with Lightning Labs. So roast beef, we've known him since I think 2014. So we go back and forth, and then he built LND on top of btcsuite.
So how many people in total are involved? With the development?
I feel like with the development, I want to say it's like 15, but 10 of them are really pretty active.
Sorry.
Hold on. Let's this guy.
Okay. So who controls the 10% of the funds?
I am the manager of the entity that holds the funds, but all of the expenditures they're on the blockchain. So you can see that basically the gross majority of the funds have not been spent or touched. And funds flow out as contractors invoice. So basically, people like Matt and Marguerite here will invoice for their work at the end of the month, and then they get paid in Decred. According to an exchange rate, everyone gets the same exchange rate, and so on. So and the way we do it is we start people. If you do really good work, we sort of cap your hours. But then if you do really good work, we uncap your hours and allow you to keep going. Thank you.
How much of the stake is done through the exchanges?
How much of
that, whatever percentage of current coins that are staked are at exchange, not through an individual?
I'm not sure what percentage is at the exchange off the top of my head, but I would expect that, I guess, half of what isn't staked. So that's probably 25, 30%. But I'm sure, if we sat down and we looked at the exchange addresses for Decred, we could pretty quickly calculate that or estimate it.
And the exchanges keep that for themselves?
What do you mean?
He's saying, are the exchanges staking?
Yeah, are the exchanges staking?
Yeah, so the coins are locked for between the minimum of a day and a maximum of 4.7 months. So it's like a sort of like a short-term certificate of deposit. So you go to a bank and you're like, oh, I'm not going to go to the casino with this money. You put it into an account, and then it earns interest to something, Except in this case, you actually have to do something for it. It isn't entirely passive.
That's about 2% per month.
It depends on the price of the tickets. So 2% per month is average-ish. But over time and as a function of how much participation there is, the percentage returns will vary. Right? Because if everybody piles in, buys a bunch of Decred, and then stakes it, the price of the tickets goes up, and then your rate of return goes down.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So again, if you haven't signed a waiver for Pumping Station 1, please do so. If you want to get the tour, I think Ray is just going to be right out there in the other room. So we're going to clean up here, and then we are headed over to Chief O'Neill's just down the street. So head over there now, hang out with us, or go get the tour, and then come join us, wherever you like. And thank you for coming out. Upstairs, right? Upstairs. Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah, I don't get to talk very often. It's not fun.